we've heated this room specially for you. Thank you so much for coming to this. This is an interesting one for the CSJ, in that digital is quite new for us. In fact, it's quite new for mankind. We were reflecting this morning that actually we've run events so far on wages, which are as old as jobs. We've run events on slavery, which is as old as mankind, and we've ran a course on sports, which is certainly as old as the Aztecs, the Romans, the ancient Greeks, everything else. Digital is very, very new to us and society, and actually we need to get to grips with it and how it impacts on society. I did a degree not that long ago, and I hand wrote my dissertation of 10,000 words as neatly as I could, and that was perfectly acceptable. 11 years later, my 4-year-old at primary school was marked on his abilities to use a mouse and a digital camera. So in just that decade, things have changed massively in the way we do things. So what we've gone for today is a large panel who are going to speak for short amounts on a range of topics, because this is an issue that often is talked about in technical terms, and we want to make sure it's talked about in social terms and what it means for society as well. So I won't introduce them all. On this panel, we have people who I've known everything from 20 years to about 30 seconds. So I won't do a very uneven introduction. I will let them introduce themselves. But they have a range of experience and thoughts around what the digital growth that we see all around us means for society. So actually, let's go straight ahead. And can I ask Helen, if you would go first? That'd be great.
So hi, actually it's upsetting me there's a chair here and you're all standing.
Yes.
One of you surely should sit down. In my
We need an app for that, don't we?
Yeah.
Find a seat.
So hi, I'm Helen. I'm the Chief Exec of Good Things Foundation. We're a digital inclusion and social inclusion charity. Probably the thing I'm going to say in my short amount of time is about the classic thinking global, acting local. The reason I say that is because we work with 5,000 hyper-local organisations across communities across the UK. Public libraries, community centres, football clubs, social housing providers, there's even a fish and chip shop. And I'm saying think global because actually just this year we've taken the good practice that we've learned here in Britain to Kenya and to Australia. We can do that because actually we've built a digital platform. So our goal is to reach the most excluded people here in this country, but also reach them elsewhere, but to use digital in every single possible way in our back end, but also our front end. We have an online learning platform called Learn My Way. So when we started out, we were very much a digital inclusion charity, a digital inclusion organisation. That was what we did. People used to accuse me of being a single issue charity, in fact. But the more we worked, the more that we saw that the reach that we had, people who are digitally excluded were usually also socially excluded. So we were reaching the most socially excluded people, and we were doing it through those local communities with people that they trusted, and we powered that with digital. So then we began to tackle other challenging social issues such as health, employability, financial literacy, and English language for migrants. And we do all of those now through that network. As one of our local partners said to us, that we work with them so that they can tackle what that person needs. So it's about bringing together lots of different policy strands. We work with a number of different government departments and with the private sector and with other trusts and foundations so that we can pull it all together. So actually, when that person who was 25 years a carpet fitter in Portsmouth, actually his life falls apart in his own language, he has a breakdown, he's then put back together with the support of that local community. But it's not just digital skills that he needs, but it's employability, it's self-esteem, it's efficacy. I think the difference is that now with digitisation, we're creating a new divide. So actually the people who are left behind, they're not just, they can't, find out what time the next bus is coming. They're actually more and more excluded from basic public services. So my 3 policy points are, first of all, this is one of my 3, is that I've been doing digital inclusion for a long time and there's no silver bullet. Absolutely, socially excluded people are digitally excluded. Therefore, by working in digital exclusion, you can work in social inclusion as well. The government, through the new Digital Skills Partnership and the new entitlement, so part of the digital economy bills now says that every person who wants free training on how to use basic digital skills, they can get it. That hasn't come into play yet, but I'm slightly worried it's going to be more of the same, and obviously you might know there's no new budget for it, so it's just from the existing adult education budget. My second point is if you embed digital into social policy, so not thinking of that as a new thing, but seeing digital as being an opportunity to deliver better social policy. Remember, those people who are digitally excluded are also the biggest users of public services. Then rather than thinking of it as a separate thing, embed it as the same thing. And then thirdly, build on what you've already got. So obviously through the online centres network, there's a fantastic social infrastructure, but also that's there through social housing providers, also that's there through churches and faith groups. So build on the social infrastructure that's in our communities, and if you can reach them and you can work with them in a holistic way through digital, that they will be reaching into those hearts of communities. And finally, on leadership, I'm slightly worried about the digital skills partnership is going to be about passing the buck. So if everybody's in a big room and we're all in it together, then where's the leadership? This is one agenda where I think we need to be very ambitious, much more ambitious than we are being now. And I hope that the government sees that part of the role of government is to provide that leadership.
Thank you. Gillian, I suppose next, maybe you are a leader, you are an MP, could you?
Yes, thank you for that. Well, I am an MP, but I've been an MP for 4 months. I'm a new MP for Chichester. Prior to that, I spent 27 years in international business, and the last probably 10 or 12 in digital, so making money digital, making travel and tourism services digital. And then, so I kind of get tech, and I've worked in the tech industry, very comfortable with it. On my journey to becoming an MP, to kind of cross over from business and into the world of politics, I did become a councillor and also was on the board of governor of a hospital, and it kind of struck me there how this digital exclusion, really, how it manifests itself, particularly with access to public services, because a lot of the public services now are incredibly simple to access via digital and incredibly difficult to access via any other route. Same with some of the health services, and actually what in health it's actually holding back, I think, the hospitals using technology more, the NHS using technology more, because getting digital wrong and excluding people, you can't do that in the health sector. So I think there is obviously a lot more work to do. Part of the problem, and when you talk to people, certainly the people who are excluded, it's fear. It's always fear of it's something that you don't know. And even the word digital skills scares the living daylights out of most people. So I think the language and accessibility, as we do roll out these programs, I think they just need to be normal, really kind of, how you get your access to your service, as opposed to talking about them in a way that sounds too 21st century for your average pensioner in Chichester. And it is often older people or people who just don't have access to the facility. Education is key, but education at all different levels. I do like the idea that's highlighted here about building digital skills into every new apprenticeship and T-levels. I think it's very important. And that's not just the base skills. Digital skills move on so quickly. In 2010-11, I went back to school myself, to London Business School, because everything had changed, even about business. Digital had transformed business models. And so instead of selling whatever you were selling data or advertising as byproducts of the business. So it moves on so quickly, it's almost limitless in terms of the speed. Therefore, I think that's something that needs to be continual, because the base level digital skills, obviously we need to make sure everybody has them and feels comfortable. They're much simpler than almost anything else you'll do now. The more intuitive digital skills than digital services than pretty much any other form or any other way that you would access services. But it's this fear of digital that stops people feeling comfortable with it. So programs that everyday language that make older people who are nervous of new stuff is key, and then in the apprenticeship and T-levels to make sure that we're building the next generation of skills, really 21st century digital skills that will take young people into the careers that they need for, to use digital to enable their career progression.
Thank you. That seems to lead quite neatly into Calvin, actually, sort of our young educator.
Yeah, so I'm a secondary school teacher of computer science, and I see firsthand there's quite clearly a gap between the digitally literate and the illiterate. And I think we'll get some good ideas on this panel about how to address that, particularly in the ageing population. But my main concern is if we don't address that in schools, in education, we're going to see the exact same problem in 20 to 30 years. And the reason I became a teacher in the first place is because of this digital skills deficit. So I used to run a digital agency. We made websites, applications, and we outsourced all our development work to East Asia, East Europe, and we still do. And to me, that grates on me. Like, why can't we get some homegrown talent? And people came to us with great CVs all the time, but they didn't have the skills. So that highlighted there's a problem in education. And since becoming a teacher, thanks to Michael Gove's new curriculum in 2014, which introduced computing as a serious subject all throughout school, since becoming a teacher, I've seen that teachers are incredibly hard workers, like some of the hardest workers I've ever met in my life. But they're not all very comfortable or confident with technology. And if you're teaching people and you're not comfortable or confident in using technology, how are you going to enable the next generation to be? So that's part of the problem, the teaching training. We focus a lot at the moment on pedagogy, on how to teach. And I think if we look a bit more at the content of what we're teaching, that could help. I think if we give teachers some digital literacy and improve their competency, that will help everything as well. So I go as far as to say digital skills should be a part of the core curriculum after English and maths. I think if you're doing a vocational qualification, it should be a part of it. T-skills is a great time for us to get this on board from day one and make sure it's done properly, so that English, math and digital literacy are included in all new courses. Because it's estimated at the moment by 2020, 90% of jobs will require some level of digital skills. That's not even considering the new technical jobs that we're coming up with right now with driverless cars and automating the tube, that kind of thing. So let's make sure that our young people are equipped with the skills they need for the workplace and the digital skills. And I think if we do that, we'll prevent this skills gap coming back in 20 to 30 years' time.
Syed, come to you now. So you have a slightly different post from being a secondary school teacher, but
Yeah, I was a lecturer at one time, actually, funny enough. I've been a geek for a long time. In the early 80s, I had a X81, I had a Spectrum. I used to do machine code when I was at university. I coded Fortran 77. For those of you, that's probably before most of you were born in this room. And I've always loved tech. But the issue I've always became increasingly aware of, especially as a politician when constituents write to you, is the issue of exclusion. And we talk about all sorts of exclusion, particularly with some of the work I've done in the CSJ in the past. But this is a huge issue that we all have to tackle. And if you think about the cost of public services and state services, in some ways it's going up, but actually digital allows it and technology allows us to cut the cost at the same time. But what that means is how do you move the users of those services onto the digital platform? And I think Gillian was absolutely right when she said it is a fair, and the language we use, digital platforms. It sounds exciting to someone like me, the geek, and who's now the father of geeks. But actually, if all you want to do is apply for something you've applied for all your life via a paper form, and you're suddenly told almost overnight, actually you now have to apply this way, it's a scary thing. And I'll give you a quick example. I did some work with a local jobs club in Croydon, and they set up the jobs club. Jane Laville was an amazing lady. I think she's done some work at the CSJ as well. And they were amazing because actually people going to the local job centre just felt that they were a statistic. Have you been to a number of interviews? Tick. Right. But actually the people didn't care about the outcome. She set up a local jobs club. But the first thing she did, she asked for second-hand computers. Because actually for most people applying for jobs now, they have to do it online. And most of the people applying for jobs did not have what we now fancily call digital skills. And how do we get them from being used to just turn up for an interview or fill in the paper form, to actually get on that first step of job application, which is actually to apply for the job in itself. The other thing we've got to think about is actually those people who, if we are not very good at getting people from the old paper platforms to digital platforms, do we just exclude them by definition by saying you must go digital? I get constituents who say I haven't received my bill for ages, And when you contact the company, they say, oh, well, actually, we sent them a letter months ago telling them that, actually, what we've decided to do, that we're going to online billing. Now, of course, they can get a paper bill, but we're going to charge them £5 a quarter. That is excluding people who are not confident enough to move on to digital billing, who don't feel comfortable. And you see this across a whole range of issues. I had a constituent who is an accountant. He's a rather elderly accountant, and he has rather elderly clients who are still staying in business, still working. He used to submit all their tax returns in paper. He was told by HMRC that he had to move to online. He did not know where to start. He did not even know where to go. We tried to find ways of introducing him to people who could introduce, to teach him to go online. And in the end, he was fined by HMRC, and there's nothing I can do about it, because actually the law says, as far as I could make it out, and we asked lawyers about this, that actually he's breaking the law, and he's actually not exercising duty of care for his clients because he refuses to go online. Now, I understand that. You could be very, you could say, look, we've got to move on and we've got to go online. But actually, he felt digitally excluded, and his clients felt digitally excluded. And we've got to think about how we think about those people. I think there've been some great campaigns like Keep Me Posted. And I understand, but why we want to move everyone digital. But if we focus on the costs, and companies say, well, it costs us more to send out paper bills, despite making massive profits. And actually, we are contributing to that digital exclusion. Just one more thing I think I'd like to say is people are awfully confused about the cost of some of the services. Just simple internet to their home. Simple, look at all the bundles out there. If just by a simple mobile phone, they might just want to make the occasional phone call. And they probably don't use more than 5-10 minutes a month. Yet it's not very easy on the shops or on the websites, if they can actually go to a website to find the budget option that's suitable for them. They are pushed, or it's pushed to them, the most expensive options in massive bundles. Eat as much as you like data. These guys don't want to eat very much data at all, if at all. Yet they are pushed to far more, and they then feel, actually, I can't even own a mobile phone, or I can't own a smartphone, or I can't have access to the internet. So I think we have to look at every step of this digital exclusion. It's not just an issue in the UK; it's an issue right across the EU, right across the world. I read the other day, I think there's still 2 million users of AOL online using dial-up connections, not broadband. So it's right across the world, but we've got to work out how we take people from where they are now to where they want to be, and not assume it's going to be top-down state or top-down private sector. It's actually going to be in the hearts of our community, supporting community projects such as yours and others that help people move on.
Thank you. Another seamless segue there on the company's business side. It'd be great to hear from Iain. Talk.
Yeah, Iain Wood, Director of Corporate Affairs at TalkTalk. We're an internet service provider, so I don't think it surprises anyone in the room to know that we're passionate about the ability of technology to change not just our society but also our economy for the better. And there's probably going to be, if you read the report, there's a lot of negatives in there, and we're probably going to spend a lot of time this morning talking about policy challenges and problems. So I do want to start with a little note of optimism, because it isn't all doom and gloom. Britain is actually doing really well in the digital revolution and has the potential to be world leading in it. Just take a couple of stats. So the UK is already a global tech cluster that's sucking in talent and capital from around the world. That's driven in part by our insatiable appetite for digital services. So Britons are the most enthusiastic digital shoppers in the world. So we spend more per head than any other country online. I'm certainly part of that problem. It's also driving growth and prosperity. So in the aftermath of the recession, when the rest of the economy was sluggish, according to Nesta, the tech sector was creating jobs 3 times faster than the rest of the economy. And contrary to what we hear a lot about the gigging economy and 0 hours contracts, they were good jobs. The average salary in the sector was £50,000, about a third higher than the rest of the economy. So there is a lot of cause for optimism, but there's no question that we won't fulfil our potential as a country if a chunk of the country is left behind. And I think what the CSJ report does really well is shine a light on the people that are being left behind. So 12.6 million people lacking basic digital skills. That doesn't mean they can't code an app, that means they can't send an email. 12.6 million people can't send an email, and they're not all pensioners. Half of these people are of working age. And unsurprisingly, they don't fall evenly across the different demographic groups. So half of those people are in the disadvantaged socioeconomic groups. 25% of disabled people are offline entirely. Only 10% of app developers are women. So they won't be able to get those £50,000 jobs I was talking about a second ago. That's going to entrench gender divides across the economy as well. So there's a real risk that if we don't address the digital divides that we see in the country, far from actually being something to be excited about, digital revolution ends up being a negative. It ends up entrenching the existing social divides we've seen in the country. And in short, it ends up locking the most vulnerable in our society out of modern society. I'm conscious of the request for brevity, so perhaps we'll come back to the policy solutions in the debate. One thing I do want to call out, though, is we cannot conflate access to infrastructure with the desire to access infrastructure. There's been a huge political focus over the last few years about rolling out better, faster, more reliable broadband, and as an internet service provider, clearly we think that's essential, absolutely essential. But I think there's been far less focus on ensuring that everybody in society is able to access that infrastructure. So the 12.6 million people who don't have basic digital skills online, they can already access the internet today. They're choosing not to. They're choosing not to because they don't think it's relevant for them, they're scared of it, they don't have the skills, or they think it's too expensive. So that requires a very different set of policy solutions than simply building out infrastructure and assuming people will come. So that's why we supported CSJ in commissioning the report to look at what these policy interventions are, because it's crucial that we do need them, but we also need them quickly, because the longer we wait, the bigger this divide is going to get, and the more entrenched it becomes as a barrier to social justice.
Yeah, I will obviously come out in a minute. Questions, so be thinking of your questions, but before we do, Michael, who is a rural constituency MP, so probably also has views about broadband.
No, absolutely. I want to pick up very much some points at the end about access, because I think actually access is also important in terms of those who are left behind. My constituency, Mid Dorset and North Poole, covers 3 different local authorities, one of which, Purbeck, is in the bottom 2 in England in terms of average speeds, and in the bottom 10 in the whole country in terms of average speeds of internet. And I think this is really important, because if you can't get onto the internet in the first place, it's picking up Ian's point slightly, if you can't get onto the internet in the first place, then of course you're going to be left behind before we even get to the discussion in relation to digital skills. So I think that the context of speeds is important. In terms of if you're an intermediate user, I'm told you need 17 megabits per second as an average. If you're a family user, between 30 and 50 megabits per second, and yet many of my constituents struggle on 0.7, certainly sub 2 megabits per second, and there are 1.4 million households across the country who don't have access to anything beyond those 2 megabits per second. So I think access in the first place is the first stage of the discussion. Let's look at what the government has done. Let's be a little bit optimistic. Glass half full to start off with before we get to the challenges. I think the universal service obligation will be a good thing. That means that consumers will be able to demand faster speeds, getting up to 10 megabits per second. Okay, a small step, but it's getting there. And secondly, government schemes such as subsidies. Rural areas, really difficult to roll out. We all know the discussion about copper, about the slow speeds, the further away from the line that you are. Satellite is an option. Satellite is a potential solution, but it's expensive. And of course, the higher the expense, the greater the divide in terms of costs. There are government subsidies, costs about 400 quid or thereabouts to put up one of these satellites. And once it's there, that's fine, but then the cost is 3 times. So once the satellite's installed, government subsidy fine, but then it's 3 times the cost for your monthly rent, and also it's actually then a limited amount as well. So I think cost is something that is vital as part of the discussion as well. So when you think of the rural idyll, by all means think of Dorset, that's absolutely fine, but the rural idyll covers the rural poor as well, and this is absolutely part of the discussion. And when government talks about moving from super fast to ultra fast, I urge caution, because I say we need to focus on those who haven't even got to the super fast in the first place, and don't exclude those when you're looking to get up to ultra fast speeds.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all 6 of you. Right, I'm going to open it up to the floor now for questions. I suppose just before I do, I am going to take a chair's prerogative on this one and ask the first question. There's a lot of conversation about the need for skills to come into education. There is also this question of just simply how practical that is. Teachers do a year of training before they go on, and then they don't really get reskilled themselves. There is an enormous number of pressure on DFE at the moment to do 100 other things. They recently had huge changes to the curriculum and are going to have more. How realistic is this to pile it into education?
Sure, well this is the perfect time to do this. We're looking at the QTS, the Qualified Teacher Status at the moment, and saying what does that mean and how can we make that more rigorous. This would be the perfect time to include more things in there or adjust what we're doing and include digital literacy or digital skills in that, both in making sure that teachers are competent and making sure that they have the skills that they need to pass on to students. We can also look at things like working better with industry. I think education is very isolated, especially in primary and secondary stage. Teachers tend to go to school, to university, and back to school again. If we had better relationships with industry, we have people from sectors advising teachers on what's relevant at the moment and changes, or encouraging teachers to go spend some time in industry. That kind of relationship needs to be evolved from what it is at the moment.
Can I just make a couple of points on that? The first is, when I was at school, we were a generation where coding was part of the curriculum, and we had at least one or two teachers in the school who would teach you very simple coding. Then we stripped that out of the curriculum for years, and in some ways, we lost a whole generation of people. We didn't necessarily want to be coders, but they had to feel comfortable with computers. Now we're in the transition where we're bringing that back in, but as the parents of two boys who have been as users of this, if you like, or the customers of this, or however you want to phrase it, sometimes they laugh at their teachers because we're at that transition period where they know more than their teachers about what they're supposed to be being taught, and they go off it. The other thing we've got to look at is actually the university sector. I worked with an organisation in London called the Makers Academy. They charge people, I think, about £8,000 for a 6-week course, and they say even from one course to another, the curriculum changes. That's how fast the world is changing. And they said the problem is computer science degrees are out of date by the time people have got through their first year. And you've got to look at new models. Their model is 6-week course, and even from one 6-week course to another, the students are learning something completely different to their predecessors. We've got to move much faster at all levels.
And can I just say, I think we need to, again, language is important, and I think we need to kind of, building on Syed's points, maybe frame it in it is continual reskilling, because even talking about illiteracy, I mean, how off-putting is that? I'm suddenly thick at something. So, digital literacy and illiteracy, we shouldn't use that kind of language. And reskilling and continually reskilling, because it does move so fast. And we talk about the connection between industry and education, which has never been so good. But when you've got a very fast moving environment, and it's not just tech sector, it affects every sector. The way that businesses are delivered now, and look at 10 years ago and look at now, they're completely transformed. So you need to be thinking about, what are the careers, and where are, the future careers, what skills do I need, and how can I continually reskill? And if we had that mindset where there was access, at very simple access points, many of them, where obviously apprenticeships is one, and education and school is another, job centres and jobs fairs and jobs focus on careers another, and make it just much more part of our natural kind of environment, that you will always not know lots of things in the digital world. That's fine. So it's just how you go along the journey and make that acceptable for people and accessible to people. Particularly with the emphasis on which jobs are going to get you where you need to get to in the future. Because my biggest fear is when you look at careers advice in schools, it's 20 years old. It doesn't even touch the digital careers that are opening up. It's because, of course, the teachers don't really know about them and don't feel comfortable talking about them.
Can I say something controversial? I'm actually less concerned about the schools, because the computing curriculum isn't perfect. It's a big step forward. I think there were challenges when it was implemented in terms of whether teachers were given the support they needed to teach it. But I'm actually far more concerned about people in the sort of 50, 60-year-old bracket. So working ages are going to extend. We saw from the Matthew Taylor report the amount of automation and the way work is going to change. There are going to be whole sectors of the economy that need to move. We're having this huge debate about Uber at the moment, where essentially how do we carve up the existing pie with the taxis? Ultimately, we're all ignoring the fact that in 15 years' time, the pie isn't going to exist. There's going to be driverless cars and driverless taxis. And I'm far more concerned about how does someone in their 60s, who now has to work till they're 70, who is never engaged in technology, how do they retrain? Because they're going to have to retrain and find a new job. And at the moment, I think we've addressed the skills challenge. It's not perfect, but we're getting there. I don't think we've come close to working out how we move whole sections of the economy and retrain people who are fundamentally not used to retraining.
Like most of us.
Yeah, Michael and Helen.
Yeah, can I just pick up two really brief points? I absolutely agree that the link between schools, education and industry has never been better. I can give an example in Dorset. Dorset Young Chamber of Trade, has set up a link between several schools and businesses and industries who go, and that is absolutely fantastic and really good news. But I'm very cautious as someone who comes from a teaching family, to want to overburden yet further our educators. A constant complaint that I have as a constituency MP is the amount of burden that there is on everyday teachers, and I would hate to see that burden extended. So whenever we look at the curriculum, whenever we look at which subjects should be on, should not be on, I'm always very cautious and say that's absolutely fine, we'd love to have absolutely everything on it, but it's simply not possible, and it's a matter of prioritising and giving the teachers a break sometimes.
I think one thing we need to make sure that we recognise is that, and bringing it back actually to the social justice point. So we help 250,000 people a year in England. Half of them don't have a level 2 qualification. That means they have no GCSEs at all, no O-levels, nothing. A third of them have no qualifications at all. So actually the idea that all of a sudden we're going to get the kids in the school and we're going to teach them and everything's going to be fine, you know, right now in the UK, 40% of young people leave school without English and maths at level 2. So that, I mean, I'm not going to, you know, teachers do work really hard, but I think that, as I said in my opening remarks, there is no silver bullet. We can do more in schools, but we've got to recognise that actually the adults that we're seeing, their problems are, obviously they haven't used technology before, but neither have they wanted to use it. So often it is because they're unemployed and they need to do it to look for work, or a family member has a really bad illness and actually the only place for them to find any decent information is on the internet. And sometimes it's just because they always thought they were too thick and too stupid to do it, but one of their friends did it and persuades them to go down to the local online centre with them. So the problems that we see is that they have very low learning confidence. So, and I don't believe that necessarily we're still helping young people, because these are, you know, mostly people over the age of 30, but they don't believe they can learn something new. Society's told them that they're stupid and that they're underachieving and they have low aspiration. The other thing which is really important when we're all using the internet is we're inquisitive. If we want to find something, or if we click on a link and it doesn't take us where we thought it was, we'll click on another link because we think that's what you should do. The adults that we're teaching, they don't do that. They're not taught to be inquisitive, and society doesn't allow them to be inquisitive. And I think we've really got to understand, particularly the overlap between lower socioeconomic groups, the desire for social justice, social exclusion and digital exclusion have a massive overlap, and it's much more. It's a much harder problem than teaching someone some skills. And I think it's really important that we understand this isn't just about teaching someone how to send an email and then all of a sudden they're going to be fine. Actually, this is about teaching people with low self-esteem, low confidence, low aspiration, that they are worthwhile, and that actually the people who care about them, but also digital provides them that platform to have a better life. Not just to be able to send an email, but actually to have a better life, to get a job, to get in touch with children that you've lost touch with a long time ago, to volunteer, to feel part of your local community. That's what I see in the work that we do, and this isn't just about skills. We've got to make sure that we understand there's a massive overlap with social inclusion as well.
Fantastic, thank you. Can we open it up to the floor then? If you have a question, if you could say who you are and where you're from, that'd be terrific. Yeah.
Hi there, my name's Helen, I'm from the Scouts Association. Michael, you picked up an excellent point that teachers are already overburdened, and I agree. I think there's a big role for the third sector to play. At the Scouts we have digital badges that young people as young as 6 could go to, and also badges going to coding. So I think there's a big role for the third sector. How do you see the role of the third sector in working with schools and also working with businesses?
I completely agree, and you know, I've a nephew who has Down syndrome, and he's in the Scouts, and he's just got his digital badge, which you know, because of course, actually, the irony of the point you said is digital is actually much easier than almost all the other things that we talked about, and you know, much more intuitive. So I completely agree that this just needs to be part of everywhere, really. And really, the language is always find out something you don't know, because there always will be something you don't know in the digital world. And it's just a new way of communicating and finding out information. It's not something that requires you to be a coder or requires you to have any particular math skills or whatever. You know, it really is about, you know, showing those examples. And I think the Scouts, you know, is a great example. And you know, again, will just make it just much more normal and much more accessible.
I think we can all be part of the solution, actually. I mean, those of you who know me, I'm a sort of one of the scratch record things I bang on about is community conservatism, and us being part of the solution, not just being a political party that turns up and knocks on doors and delivers leaflets and asks people how they're going to vote, and they don't see us for another 4 years or until the next election. And actually, some of the things that I've done, I've seen others do, and we can do. For example, we ran on the Roehampton estate in West London. We had an elderly lady who asked us, how do we access these things? So we ran a club for them. I got my staff, I got Rick here who does my social media to go in with my staff. Yeah, we ran a simple club asking them, simple thing, how do you turn on the computer? Actually, what do you do after you turn on the computer? What do you want to go on the computer for? Is it because you want to send an email to your grandson across the world? And we actually took them step by step. Now, as Conservatives, we could be part of that solution. We could have local MPs running these little clinics and actually go, and also not expecting people to come to us. It'd be nice if they come to our city, but going to them. Go onto the estate and say, is there a room that we can run this for you, from which we can run this for you? And using all our contacts to get the computers and get the internet connection to take people through this. I know Calvin's done this at the youth level as well in your local community. I think we can be part of the solution. So it's not just the third sector or government, whoever else. I think we can all say, how can we solve this problem together?
But let me endorse the third sector, in particular the scouting movement, founded in Dorset, so bound to be a good thing. And my son's in the Scouts as well. He may or may not have the digital badge, but he's terrible at sewing the badges on, so I couldn't actually tell you whether he's got it.
That is the hardest bit.
But it comes back to the serious point that to many of our Ed opened up talking about his child's first bit of homework having to be online. Likewise, so much of the homework that's given is online. If you can't actually physically get online in the first place because you don't have the correct students together, then you are digitally excluded. Absolutely right, third sector, but I agree with Syed, it's got to be across the board as well.
Iain, yeah.
Can I give the business perspective? It's gross oversimplification, but I think there are three important things that businesses can do, particularly with the third sector. Firstly, it's money. The third sector always needs more money, it's just a fact of life. And I think businesses have an obligation to help finance some of the good work that's going on. So we've got a long-standing partnership with Helen's organisation that helps deliver some of the training at a local level. Secondly, it's expertise. So I don't think we've worked with the Scouts, but we have worked with the Brownies in terms of developing the badges, particularly online safety. And I think online safety links very neatly to the third point, which is I think businesses have an obligation to civilise the digital world. We can't just provide a pipe into someone's home and expect people to navigate the internet. We know that there's fear out there. There's fear about accessing inappropriate content. There's fear about grooming. There's fear about radicalisation. There's fear about being scams. And I think digital companies have an obligation to respond to that. That doesn't just mean providing the pipe. That means helping families navigate it safely. So that's products, that's advice, all the wraparound services that can help break down some of that fear and actually provide a protective barrier against some of the awful bits of the internet so that people actually get excited about the best bits of the internet.
Helen, as the third sector,
Well, I mean, I like Iain's point about the money, and I think actually the smaller the organisation, the more local the organisation, the harder they find it. And actually, obviously, there's been several years of austerity now, so I think that's very tough. I think the real trick, though, is about bringing together the different sectors. So it's the third sector can't do it by themselves. The private sector can't do it by themselves, politicians can't do it by themselves, is that definitely we've all got to be working together as much as possible. So the more we can do partnerships at the national level, at the global level and at the local level, I think that's really the trick. And just quite often, particularly I work with job centres, we just say, just go along to the job centre, make a relationship, find someone that you know that you can work with and just make it happen, because it is all about those relationships as well.
Just come back on Iain's point about providing a pipe. I think, yes, businesses need to be responsible, but at the same time we have to be very careful in how we approach that. I know the UK Council for Child Internet Safety tried to provide filtering that was opt-out for all internet service providers to try and avoid adult content. And while that's a good idea, what it did is cut off access to LGBT resources and charities and sex education websites and that kind of thing. So while it can be a good idea to try and prevent people from accessing certain things, I think we have to more educate them on how to properly use the technology rather than hide it from them.
Thank you. Sorry, we've got time for two more questions before the heat grabs us. I know there's one here, sorry, and one over there. But yeah.
William Whitelow, Hertfordshire Councillor. I think you've got to look for more teachers in a very specific environment. when you reach age 70, when you are in sheltered accommodation, you do not want somebody of 50 trying to teach you how to do computers, because they do it all at the wrong pace and they put it across incorrectly. We have a wonderful guy who learnt his bit of computing at age 70, and he now is the teacher to any sheltered accommodation in Hertfordshire. And he did this, he does it in a very clever way. He explains how he couldn't do anything a few years ago, could never spell, was always the reject in the class. And by then he's got the sympathy of people around him. And then he goes on and tells them these things that really matter. You mustn't panic. There's a way of getting out of whatever you've done. That's the first lesson he gives. Getting out of it. Don't panic. So look among your older people to teach your older people. It doesn't matter whether they've got any teaching experience or anything.
A question at the back. There was a hand at the back. Yes.
I'm John Price. I run a label company for people. Talking about the rural issues of connectivity, there are two big problems. One is the internet, and I actually say that Openreach is probably the biggest barrier to rolling out rural internet. I've got a wonderful company called Gillian that delivers massive speed to middle of nowhere. BT so can't be done. That's the first thing. The second thing is, every single time a post office or a bank branch shuts and takes away the cash point, you are cutting off the people who live in that community from normal activity. So I would ask that maybe that there's a conversation with the financial organisations and the post office here that before you actually cut off, okay, can you make a contribution so that the local third sector can actually help people that are going to be left high and dry to understand about digital usage, and then maybe with the local library or something like that, because otherwise you've got whole sections of the community just completely cut off. And I think you've got to demand more of the organisations who are shutting down their branches.
Thank you. Anyone wants to respond to either of those?
I think what you focus on, not the rural issue. I'm not actually a lot of across Europe. This is a massive issue, and I think Michael covered the rural issue very well. And is the issue of the transition when you change and how you manage people through that transition. I wish I could use a better phrase, because it sounds like I'm treating people almost as sort of as a commodity. And what I mean by that is, for example, if you want to get more people onto, if you want to, when we pay benefits directly to bank accounts, for example, as opposed to sort of just collecting cash or whatever else. Actually, it's how people feel comfortable with moving from what they were used to for many years to that new way of doing things. Now, the quickest way for government would be just to pay it in to banks, and I know it does it in a certain number of ways, and then people are on online banking. But how do you take people through that is the huge problem. I think it's not just the issue you highlighted. I think there are a whole number of different issues that we have to work out. If we're going from an old, either paper-based system or semi sort of online system to a completely online system, how do you take people through that? And go back to your point, it is about understanding it from their perspective, not from the teacher's perspective. When I used to teach, one of the things we were taught about teaching is don't just talk at them and assume that they'll take it in. They have to learn. Therefore, they have to be able to take it in at their pace. And when we did the IT workshop or the computer workshop for the elderly people on the Roehampton estate, we asked them, we put them in a room. We said, "What do you want to do?" So, well, actually, I want to turn the computer on. So they led the pace of how we taught them, rather than we came and said, "Right, okay, here, this is a computer, this is a CPU. You turn it on, you go straight to the internet and click. You're done. Thank you, I'm off." We didn't do that, and you have to do it at their pace.
Helen.
Just on your point about the older volunteers, I think possibly one of the reasons why you spoke out was because I hear it a lot. It's like, oh, let's just get all the young people who know everything about computers to teach all the old people who know nothing about computers. And I'm completely with you. Like that, there's actually research from the London School of Economics that shows that one, that there's no such thing as a digital native, and two, that they're not very good at teaching. Younger people aren't very good at teaching. On the whole, older people, of course, there's some exceptions. That we also have free training for people who want to be volunteers, and actually the first thing that we teach is about empathy. It's exactly your point as well. So it's not about, right, here, I can show you how to do this. It's about asking those questions. Why are you here? What do you want me to show you? finding out about each other, starting with their interests. And obviously we do this with 25,000 volunteers a year across the whole of the UK. So anyone who wants to run, like MPs for example, clinics for their constituents, that we do have free products and services to help volunteers, to help people setting up clinics, free online content. So actually, our job is to get the country digitally included. But I just want to push on the social inclusion front, particularly with the Centre for Social Justice, because I think that we really have to see this as an opportunity to break down some of those centuries-old social injustices, because actually the same people are digitally excluded that are socially excluded. So if we actually give them confidence and self-esteem, make them feel part of their local community, then actually we can begin to put pathways in place for their social challenges as well as their digital challenges.
We're 1 minute over when a few people need to leave, I know. Are there any other quick comments?
Well, can I just 30 seconds? The suggestion from the CSJ is to have local digital leaders. It's a point that Syed picked up as well, and I think that could well help to combat. I think of Geoffrey Boycott and brilliant cricketers and things like that. They may be brilliant at playing cricket, they may not be brilliant at explaining it or coaching other people. I think it's exactly the same in the digital world as well. So at the back, John, I think you mentioned rural and banking, absolutely right. It leads into two things. Online internet banking, everyone's expected to have it. Can you actually access it in the first place? And secondly, isolation as well, rural isolation. It used to be an event to go into the village, to go into town and do your banking, and that's then taken away from them. Thank you for that point.
You have a very quick one.
The only thing I was going to say is, Helen and I have been doing these events for the last 2 or 3 years, and I think there's a real danger that we all sit here in violent agreement and say this is really important, and then nothing actually fundamentally changes. If you look over the last 3 years, the number of people who've been digitally excluded has basically been flat. Despite all of the warm words and despite events like this where we all talk about it, nothing's changing. And for me, the only thing that will dramatically move the dial is when we set a target of universal digital literacy in the UK. We wouldn't think it acceptable to say we don't care if vast swathes of the population can't read or write. Apparently at the moment it's okay to have that gap for digital literacy, and I think we need, the biggest single thing we could do is to say there will be an end point at which we will have universal digital literacy. We will cost it. It doesn't have to cost dramatic amounts of money. Helen's organisation has shown what can be done with relatively small amounts of money. There are scale options there, but unless we have the ambition to set that target and then work back from that and create plans to deliver it, I worry that we'll run these events in 5 years' time and we might all be saying the same thing.
Well, if we could change the language, and I think literacy and illiteracy is an important one, people have to want to expose what they don't know, and that's a fearful thing. And then the gentleman from Hertfordshire Council explained how the man in the teaching to parents did that. If you turn around and say, look, I couldn't do this, I struggled with that, you completely get everybody in the right frame of mind, because there's actually nothing technical that's actually quite that difficult about doing this. It's a frame of mind and wanting to sign up to do it. And if you think you're signing up for something that tells you how thick you are, you're not going to do it.
I think that is a terrific challenge on which to end things, actually. So, falls to me now just to thank all of you so much for coming and taking part in this panel.